Welcome everyone to the Bcamp podcast. I'm Richard Carey, and today we have with us Christopher Shulby, who is the head of artificial intelligence at Kin AI. So we're so excited to have you on the show today. Thank you for joining us. And to get started, Christopher, maybe tell us a little bit about Kin AI and your role there.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Um, yeah, it's Kin is something that you probably haven't heard of before because it's a very, very early stage startup. Basically, I think one way to kind of explain it is that the founders came from uh, the blockchain area a lot as well with, distributed web nodes and all that fun stuff. Um, and I think that, with the onset of the LLM boom, they looked at it and they said, this is something, we can really do with privacy and stuff like that. And so we started from that angle of building an AI companion that was private to you, and only you own your data. And it doesn't belong to the government, doesn't belong to a company, and even we can't see your data, which is really, really cool. Well, some of the learnings that we've had is that still people have a lot of expectations for AI apps, and they want them to do a lot more. And putting everything on your phone and in a walled garden is still something that we're deeply invested in. But what we've decided to do more now is focus on the application of coaching and being an AI coach because um, we have an app that gets to know you better, that has a lot of your intimate information because all of the user's information is on the phone. It goes to algorithms that are in trusted execution environments, things like that. But they're able to, open up a lot more. And so what we've been focused on mainly is using that wealth of data that isn't even ours. And like I said, trust no one. Zero knowledge proof is something we really believe in. And it's also a little bit of a hurdle because if people lose their phone or things like that, if you didn't make a backup, we can't help you. And so there's a little bit of learnings there and exactly where we're going to go with it. But just being, I think, in any case, that friend that you can trust and has your back isn't going to judge you. And it definitely isn't going to be monetizing your data anyway, is something that we're really interested in working in.
Very cool, very cool. I love that. And yeah, maybe talk a little bit about your role. How did you end up at Kin, and what does your day to day look like?
Yeah. So I guess the journey in general, I've been, working with speech and NLP since 2007, when I was an undergrad and kind of thrown into it. You probably don't want to hear about all that stuff, but going in small and large companies until, I really started getting into conversational AI when I was at Samsung, where I led the Bixby project, which was a really big project and a lot of fun, absolutely wonderful. And then working in a few other companies, and building organizations and all that fun stuff. And then I started to realize that I really wanted to get back to the day to day of the IC stuff for a while, because I've been doing a lot of people management, which I love, but with a lot of the LLM stuff. And it's like, I've been working with language models for 2 decades, and, I don't want to be the guy that's, that old dinosaur. So, I wanted to kind of jump ship a little bit to this, really, really early stage startup and say, hey, let's do this. And so it's been a lot of fun because I think that, um, working on technologies that are, privacy based, it adds a lot of hurdles in there. You can't just build like, these big cloud models and, um, you have some product limitations. And so it really makes you think on the data science part of, how can I get the most out of, smaller models, get as close to the device as I can, and still be able to give that value. And what are those trade-offs? What do they look like? And so I think it's been, a big fun experience in that way.
Yeah, very cool. that's interesting that you hung up the hat on the manager role and went back to just building stuff. Maybe can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that? Like what was your decision process for like wanting to just go build stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's that, engineer part, you like to see how things work, we like to understand them and tinkering and that kind of thing. I think one of the important things is just always having a growth mindset. And when you feel like you aren't growing and you aren't failing specifically, then you're definitely not growing. And I think that's really important is when you start to get kind of comfortable for me, that's when I start to say, okay, this is too comfortable. I need to do something else, you know. And I think even in data science is that it's a really double-edged sword with companies as well because they want to see success, they want to see things going well, but that's not growing. That's just the status quo. And so
Mhm.
I think disrupting that status quo a little bit is fun.
Got it. I love that. I love that. So I'm interested. Kin is in a really cool spot, I think, at the intersection of privacy and AI and these LLM models. And we talked a little bit before just about some of the challenges that you guys are facing. Could you talk a little bit about some of the technical challenges that you're facing at that intersection and how you guys are thinking about that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think yeah, going back a little bit on, what I was saying before and maybe in more detail, but yeah, I think that you know, we're at this intersection where we have privacy and we have AI. And so, you know, a lot of people definitely have the experience of using a ChatGPT or a Claude or, whatever it is, and getting, I guess this is kind of like magical responses. I mean, we definitely go into, where things go very, very badly as well, even with ChatGPT. And, it's, not even as solid on a lot of NLP tests that very basic algorithms are and things. So there are issues, but still, it brings a wealth of knowledge. And that's just because it's a really big model with a lot of parameters. And when we're getting into even conversational models, what we find a lot is that, you know, using smaller models like the 731B type models, a lot of times they'll give you accurate responses, but they don't have the same depth of response that you get from something that's like, a 70B or bigger.
Hmm.
And so I think that people kind of want that experience. Um, and that's really hard to do when we're talking about privacy because it's something, we can't really just embed on your phone. And there's ways of, doing, some things with, freezing layers and stuff like that, and adapters and things. But even at that, it's really not, where that intersection needs to be, right? And I think ideally with privacy is, there are, a lot of people that care a lot about it. Um, and so those are the kinds of people, that definitely don't want anything going off of their phone
Hmm.
whatsoever, and anyone to have any kind of access to it. And even when we're saying things to, a trust execution environment, there's still communication that's happening there. There are still things that, can get intercepted, even though it's all encrypted and all that. And so, I think there's a lot of other things we can talk about, things like, homographic encryption, also the newer paradigms on running models on devices and things like that. But one of the ways that we've been working on it, I think, is breaking things down into smaller steps. In that we have smaller models that are asked to do very low cognitive load tasks, and this is something as it defined, I worked a lot in crowdsourcing. And when you ask even humans to do a task like, revise this sentence or audio or whatever, they usually don't do great at it because at some point they will fail. And then you just have to throw the whole thing out, right? Where if you break things down into is this correct or not, yes or no, or just a really simple task of like, label these entities or, classify this type of memory, do those little steps and make sure that you're kind of, setting yourself up for success and the model up for success so that it can do what it needs to do and not get lost in kind of this zero sum space that we have, where a model can start to get really interested in one part of the prompt or whatever it is that was said, and then the rest of it kind of gets lost. And so kind of building it, in those more cognitive steps, building out the brain of Ken is something that, we're investing a lot in as well, and having a really strong proprietary retrieval strategy, separating out types of memory as well into things like, for example, semantic memory, like facts that like, Paris is the capital of France. You don't really know when you learn that, but you know that it's true, right?
Hmm.
And all that can kind of be represented in like a knowledge graph and things like that. Whereas like episodic experiences are things that, those types of memories can't be really represented on a knowledge graph. Like that time when, I went to the football game with Sarah, and all the things that transpired. Those are the kinds of things that we need to put on a timeline and be able to relate them to the semantic things that we know about the world, right? And how those different entities interact with each other on a timeline, and that you met a new friend, you had all these great experiences, then you met someone else, and all these other things happened, or you got a new job, you got married, all those things, and how all of that kind of weaves into who you are as a person, and how what shapes your memories and your brain.
Yeah, yeah. This is this is fascinating. So it sounds like there's a lot of like architecture questions. Like just sending one prompt to an LLM is simple, but it actually creating a coherent response, it becomes quite complicated in how all of these things work together. So this brings up a question for me, like what's your reaction when people say that LLMs are going to reduce uh, developer jobs or programming software development jobs?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are always these natural conversations that always seem to come up every 10 years or so, whenever a new paradigm comes out. And I think, um, we've had a lot of revolutions, I think as well, Bird a few years ago, or even, around 2012, 2015 with GPUs and deep neural networks. And, we keep going on and on. But I think at the end of the day, what it really means is that our job changes fundamentally. And so if I look at the things that I used to do in my day to day, in the early 2010s to today, those things are very, very different. They're very different tasks, but that doesn't change the fact that I'm still an engineer, right?
Hmm.
And I'm still looking to build new solutions and innovative solutions and things like that. And I think that we have to embrace these kinds of changes. Otherwise, we do become that dinosaur in that, I used to use mainframe, and I built my whole career on mainframe kind of guys, and then, paradigms change, and then what happens, and I think that's really what it's all about is, embracing it. I myself, I use a lot of LLMs and coding LLMs and things. I think
Hmm.
it's a lot of fun to see what you can get. If you're going to stick only to that, then you probably won't do so well. I think you'll be very mediocre. But I think that
Hmm.
getting rid of those menial tasks, even in data science, like building like a Jupyter notebook and like you know build the plots to analyze this data, and you give like some fake examples, and this is what my data looks like. I want to build this plot, and in a few seconds you have a code that's going to do matplotlib for you and pandas and stuff like that. If you don't know how pandas works, I think you'll have some problems down the line.
Hmm.
But that really takes out a lot of work, and you can have this like rapid development.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. So it's a kind of a two-pronged thing that like, yeah, people's jobs are going to change, but it's not going to eliminate engineers.
Yeah, I don't think so.
So, yeah, great. So what what advice would you tell to people who are wanting to get into an AI engineering role? Like, what are you looking for when you look for engineers at Kin?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that, one of the things is really just, focusing on the basics. Um, in that I think a lot of people are really quick to, want to get ahead quickly and all that. Um, and I think the fundamentals of machine learning are always going to be important. And so a lot of people are going to, jump on, the latest LLMs, the latest, and greatest whatever. But if you don't understand how statistics works, overfitting and underfitting, no free lunch, computational theory, N versus NP, those really silly things that, we had to do. But you have to understand them well in order to move on to the next step. And I think, being comfortable with that growth process, I think is something, that's really important. And it helps you, I think, to then start getting your foothold in the area. And I think one of the things I would suggest for people to do practically is like implementing papers. That's a really fun way to learn how to do something. And a lot of papers that come out, they aren't open source. They might be open weights or something, but you can't really replicate it. And so if you can build that and replicate the same results, that means that you've really understood it. And I think being able to do that first and then going to pushing the boundaries, being innovative, and having those failure moments of what went wrong and understanding and learning from it. I think those are the kinds of things that I like to hear, especially when I interview candidates. I really like to hear about failure stories, and it's a double-edged sword because companies absolutely hate those. Um, and so I've had a lot of people, they're like, I no, I've never failed at anything. Everything is, every model I've built has worked, and and that's just not a good story. Because really, we want to be testing things that no one's done before. Of course, it comes with trade-offs, and you have to be hitting your KPIs and all of that.
Hmm.
But at the same time, I think you know you have to experiment outside the box a little bit, and those are the kinds of stories that are they're fun, they're painful, but they're fun to hear.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that. And I think even more important at a startup, you want somebody who is has a healthy level of failures in their in their
Exactly.
uh, in their book, because like you said, like if you're not willing to risk a failure, then you're probably not, you know, doing anything that interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. I like that. So I imagine when you ask that question though, that people have these canned like responses from their interview prep of like, oh, I had this failure, but it was actually a success.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can see right through those.
Yeah.
That's fine. And I think, a lot of people do a lot of prep, but I think it's more about, you know, being transparent and understanding. I think a lot of times with projects we get into is just learning when is the time to pull the plug. Like this is not going the way I expected it to, and I'm not just going to keep going down the path. I think that's also important, and that can be a good thing.
That's a hard decision to make often.
Exactly.
So you're always like emotionally invested.
Exactly. You've been a few months in this project, it has to work. I really want to show my boss this, for my next raise. And then,
Hmm.
maybe we should just go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, interesting. Well, awesome. I want to change course just a little bit. Any other thoughts though about like challenges that you have run into, or things that like that you think are sort of on the cutting edge of privacy and AI?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really that stands out for me, especially with a lot of the reforms and things we're seeing, especially in the EU and starting to be more here in the States, is model interpretability. I think is something that's really important, especially when we're getting into this area of people who really care about transparency and privacy.
Mm-hmm.
It's, a lot of models are very black boxy,
Mm-hmm.
and there's been a lot of research since even neural networks about, model interpretability and things like that. And I think it's unrealistic to say, that we're going to be able to, get down to the level of, what a decision tree can give us. But at the same time, being able to give more insights into how it's working, I think is really important. It's also part of why, we're breaking down a lot of these steps as well to kind of understand, what's happening, from one stage to another at least. And also I really like a lot of the work that's been done on like, coalition learning, um, where basically, you can do some um, feature type imputation and things, and do ablation and take things out and understand what's really contributing to a prompt. So
Mm-hmm.
it's never really one of those things of, okay, you said this one word and that's what the LLM focused on. That's not how it works. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
even, the embeddings themselves are very lossy. You can't even do keyword search with them, right? So really it's, what coalition of, phrases or parts of phrases is it that you're using that are being representative and are getting you to the result that you wanted, and which parts aren't. And a lot of times, especially with LLMs, that's not always very obvious. Some things, we write this big long prompt and we're like, okay, I think I've really specified things. And then you start to look at it and how the inner workings are working, and you see that, most of what you've written isn't even being used.
Mm-hmm.
And you keep trying to tweak it, and you're just never going to get anywhere. And if you try that trial and error, it's not a good path. When you can, break things down into, kind of like these more ML ops now, LLM ops, which ML ops is still a young field,
Mm-hmm.
and being able to understand and test your models, I think, um, and prompts and all that is coming into it now, I think is something that's, really important, and we're definitely very, very early in that journey as well. Um, I think everybody is, uh, but I see it feels like few people focusing on the interpretability, and a lot of bandwagon noise of let's just throw these things through LLMs and get these cool results.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that at some point the government as well is going to start scrutinizing a bit more. I hope even better, because I don't really depend on the government to actually resolve anything. But I hope the consumers themselves, start to realize more what their privacy is worth, and are willing to actually pay for it. Because I
Mm-hmm.
think we're still in an early stage of grassroots, even with blockchain and those technologies, in that what is it worth to have things decentralized, and why am I giving all of my my soul to the government, to Apple's, to Google's? Do they really need all that? And I think that we're still kind of trying to educate people a little bit. But I think at some point, one thing that I like about being at this intersection with Ken is I want us to be at the right place at the right time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because who knows what's gonna come out in the next few years. Yeah, one thought that I had, and when you're talking about interpretability, does this lead you to using open source models, or does that not actually help? Is it more about maybe getting some sort of feedback from the model about how it decided, and is that just a matter of prompting it, or are there specific tools that you use to like see what, to get an understanding of why the model's doing what it's doing?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think there's definitely different ways of going about it. And when you have an API, then you're pretty much reduced more to the prompt level,
Hmm.
because you don't have anything else. And different models are exposing different levels of openness, I guess.
Hmm.
Some are open weight, some are really open source. Some you can do more with than others. I I really like even like encoder decoder models that, we've been using a lot because then you can, really mess with, the logits and understand, confidence
Mm-hmm.
because decoder only models can't really give you that. And so, of course, it depends on the model. But I think even when we're talking about just prompting, like I said, with like coalition and doing like shapely values and things like that, already I think you can get a lot of insight into, what are the kinds of things that are contributing. And in order to do that, so that's kind of the hard part is how do you test that,
Mm-hmm.
really? Because I think a lot of times it comes down to kind of building your own test sets. And it's different than traditional machine learning where, we had a classification or even regression problems, but let's say classification where, we have classes of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or whatever, and we can annotate a data set and see, okay, what's my accuracy on these four classes that I have here?
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have that anymore with prompts, right? And who's to say that, the LLM output that you obtained is as good as, or better, or worse than the response that a human wrote, or maybe another LLM wrote, doesn't really matter
Mm-hmm.
because they're very different in the way they respond. A lot of them are very wordy, but still give good responses. Others are less redundant um, and can give good responses, or even can lose information. And so it's really hard to compare them. And I think the naive first approach is doing something like a cosine similarity between the two, and you can kind of get an idea. Okay, are these kind of in the same embedding space, on like a sentence level or something like that. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's fine, but it still doesn't really give you the information that you want. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think measuring other things like readability, fluency, coherence, redundancy, and other scores, I think is really good in kind of like packaging all of that together to understand, how close am I to, the response that I'm trying to get. And once you've done that, then I think you make your path a little bit easier to being able to test the actual input in, what are the things, the factors that are influencing. So if I put in this stuff, you know, is it going to, make my results, way off in some metric or not? You know.
Yeah, super fascinating just about how to compare the results. That's like it's probably gonna be its own field in the future. There will be
Yeah.
QA, AI
Hopefully people much
QA
better than me.
engineers. I don't know, but okay. No, this has been awesome. I just have one final question, and you know, I'd like to hear about other people's experiences in education. And so I wonder if you have
Yeah.
any, like, what are your some of your best or worst experiences from your own education?
Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, I think there are a lot of good and bad things about the kind of the traditional education that we have. There's a lot of good structure, but it definitely fails people in a lot of ways. I think that for my journey, I'm one of those kids that was one of those weird kids that was a lot less interested in making friends early on, more interested in reading books. And I had a lot of intrinsic, motivation. At the same time, um, I'm definitely ADHD, something that I've learned to live with and learned to make my superpower. And so when I was a kid, that was really hard because I really wanted to be in school. I wanted to learn stuff, but I also wanted to look out the window. And so channeling that into, more productive um, windows of times where I can really obsess about something and then take a break, things like that,
Hmm.
I've learned to do. And I think for me, best experiences are, I've had a lot of mentors along the way in school, also in my graduate degree at Ohio State, with people who were able to get me into early internships as well and stuff, to PhD. And having those, I think, mentors is really important. Um, for about a decade, I actually worked at a school, an online school for kids that were at risk, that were kicked out of brick and mortar schools.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really important for me because one thing that I realized is really what they need the most is just someone they can trust. Because most of the teachers they've had until now have failed them for one reason or another, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not because they don't want to learn. It's not because they don't want to be in school. It's because, they don't trust the system. They don't trust the people that are around them. And so I think that's really important. And that's where I think, the worst experiences come from. And so, I think again, going back to, having a growth mentality, um, whether it's the, formal education or more practical ways of doing things, I think that, you know, there's only so much you can get with theory. You have to get your hands dirty and you have to do it yourself. And that's really the only way that you learn. People who aren't great writers probably didn't read a lot, and if you're not out there reading a bunch of books, you're never going to become a better reader, a better writer. And the same thing as coding. You can know all the computational theory you want, but if you don't do, the silly hello worlds all the way to more complex examples with code and whatever language it is that you're working on, you won't get there, and you have to, keep at it. And so I think that's really just kind of the evolving nature of education.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, it's interesting. There's a little bit of a paradox introduced here in this conversation when you're talking about like you want to see somebody who really understands the theory, and that really the only way to understand the theory is to actually go build stuff. So
Exactly.
I really liked your advice earlier about finding papers that are writing about theory and trying to recreate the code from those papers. That seems like a really high impact way to both understand the theory and get practical experience building that stuff. So I really
Yeah,
like
for
that.
sure. For sure. Yeah, I think the other way around is very hard. Getting your hands dirty and then trying to learn about it is very hard, and then you play catch up. But definitely, I think it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, again, thank you so much, Christopher, for joining us. This has been fantastic, and it's been a pleasure. And thank you for joining the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a lot of fun. I'm really interested to see as well what Bcamp does.